House Martell. House Martell of Sunspear is one of the great houses of Westeros. It rules the peninsula of Dorne in the far south of the continent from their castle Sunspear. Though loyal to the Iron Throne, the Martells were never conquered by the Targaryens and have pursued a more isolated role in wider political events since Robert's rebellion. With the assassinations of Prince Doran Martell and his only heir, Prince Trystane, by Ellaria Sand and the three eldest Sand Snakes, the Sand Snakes carry the Martell blood through their father Oberyn Martell. The Sand Snakes also continue to use the Martell sigil to represent themselves and Dorne. Under the leadership of Ellaria Sand, the forces of House Martell and Dorne were aligned with Daenerys Targaryen against House Lannister. Following the deaths of Ellaria and the three eldest Sand Snakes, a Martell rises to power as the new Prince of Dorne. House Martell's sigil is a red sun pierced by a golden spear, on an orange field, a combination of the original Martell sigil, a yellow spear, and the emblem of Princess Nymeria, a red sun, to symbolize the marriage of the warrior queen to Mors Martell. Their house words are unbowed, unbent, unbroken. History. House Martell started out as local kings in Dorne, which was long divided between many petty kings of the First Men and Undulls. About 1,000 years ago, Rhoynar refugees fleeing conquest by the Valyrian freehold in Essos migrated across the narrow sea to Dorne, led by their warrior queen Nymeria. Mors Martell was smitten with Nymeria and chose to join forces with her through marriage alliance. With their combined strength, they conquered and unified the rest of Dorne. To symbolize their union, the original golden spear sigil of Mors Martell was combined with the red sun sigil of Nymeria, creating the red sun pierced by a golden spear sigil that House Martell has used as a sigil ever since. Like their Rhoynar ancestors, House Martell styled its rulers as princes instead of kings, and kept using the titles, resisting the Targaryen invasion and keeping local laws and traditions even after joining the Seven Kingdoms after a matrimonial alliance. The Martell words are unbowed, unbent, unbroken, referring to their history, in which they have never been successfully conquered by outsiders. This makes them unique among all of the great houses. During the Targaryen conquest, 3 centuries before the War of the Five Kings, Dorne was the only region of the Seven Kingdoms to successfully resist the Targaryens and their dragons. Realizing that large armies could not stand against dragons, as seen at the Field of Fire, nor large castles, as seen at the burning of Harrenhal, the Dornish instead resorted to guerrilla warfare, ambushing Targaryen soldiers and harassing their supply lines as soon as their dragons moved on to the next castle, then disappearing back into the harsh deserts when the dragons returned. The Dornish armies took advantage of Dorne's arid climate, which helped them to adopt attrition warfare against the invading Targaryens, as the arid climate and harsh wastelands of Dorne cannot easily support large invading armies. Losing many men due to attrition, ultimately even Aegon the Conqueror decided to withdraw from Dorne, to focus on reigning in the other 6 newly conquered kingdoms. House Martell and Dorne have never been successfully conquered. Over a century and a half after the Targaryen conquest of the rest of Westeros, they were invaded again by King Daeron I Targaryen, the young dragon. A military genius, his conquest of Dorne actually succeeded, on the battlefield. But the initial conquest was followed by a 4-year-long Dornish insurgency, in which occupying troops were again bled through ambush and guerrilla tactics. Lyonel Tyrell, the steward that Daeron I put in charge of Dorne, was then assassinated, and all of Dorne rose up in open rebellion. Daeron I himself was killed attempting to put down the insurrection, and after only 4 short years House Martell once again ruled an independent Dorne. A few decades later, a little over a century before the War of the Five Kings, King Daeron II the Good managed to finally unite Dorne with the Iron Throne, not through conquest, but by voluntary marriage alliance on equal terms. Daeron II married the sister of the Prince of Dorne, and the Prince of Dorne married Daeron II's sister. This special, semi-autonomous status allowed Dorne to retain several special privileges, such as the Martells continuing to style themselves as Prince or Princess instead of Lord Paramount, and continuing their practice of gender-blind primogeniture. This union did cause several political tensions at the royal court between Daeron II's pro-Martell faction and anti-Martell lords, from the Reach, the Stormlands, and the Dornish Marches, eventually leading to the Blackfyre Rebellion. Generations later, King Aerys II Targaryen, later known as the Mad King, had no daughters, so he sought a suitable bride for his son Crown Prince Rhaegar Targaryen from outside of the family. Aerys II chose to snub the offer of Tywin Lannister, his own trusted hand of the king and dutiful servant, that Rhaegar marry his own young daughter Cersei. Instead, a match was arranged with the then current Princess of Dorne to wed her daughter Elia Martell to Rhaegar. In Robert's rebellion, Elia was kept in King's Landing to ensure the continued allegiance of House Martell to the Targaryens against the rebels. Elia bore Rhaegar 2 children, but all 3 were later killed during Robert's rebellion, during the sack of King's Landing by Tywin Lannister's army. Elia's brothers Doran and Oberyn were outraged and, while peace was restored, the Martells withdrew from interacting with the royal court. During King Robert Baratheon's subsequent reign, the Martells and Dorne were rarely if ever even mentioned at court, except for their Dornish wine. House of the Dragon, Season 1. More than a decade after the War for the Stepstones, Prince Corin Martell allies Dorne to the Triarchy. This powerful alliance is considered threatening in both Pentos and King's Landing. Game of Thrones, Season 1. Bran Stark recites the motto of House Martell during a lesson with Maester Luwin. Game of Thrones, Season 2. Tyrion announces his plan to marry Myrcella to Prince Trystane Martell of Dorne. The alliance is intended to keep the Dornish from siding with their enemies in the War of the Five Kings, and to ensure the survival of a Baratheon/Lannister heir should King's Landing fall. Game of Thrones, Season 4. Prince Oberyn Martell, along with a retinue of Dornish lords and knights, arrives in King's Landing to attend the royal wedding in the place of his brother, Prince Doran Martell. Tywin personally responsible for the deaths of Elia and her children, and is in the capital intent on taking revenge on the Lannisters. Following Joffrey's death, Tywin meets with Oberyn in private, and tells him that he wants to ensure that the Martells remain close to the throne, which is still facing numerous threats. The Iron Islands are still in open rebellion to the west, a wildling horde is massing against the wall to the north, and worst of all, Daenerys is amassing a large army of her own. As a sign of good faith, Tywin makes Oberyn one of the 3 judges at Tyrion's trial. Tyrion is subjected to a humiliating show trial at court, which he ends by demanding a trial by combat. The crown's champion is the fearsome Gregor Clegane, but ultimately Oberyn volunteers to be Tyrion's champion. Oberyn faces off against the massive Gregor in the following trial by combat, and gets killed. Oberyn, however, had coated his spear with manticore venom, incapacitating and seemingly dooming Gregor. Game of Thrones, Season 5. Oberyn's death has caused outrage among the Dornish population, among them Illyria Sand and his bastard daughters, the Sand Snakes. However, Doran refuses to wage war against the Lannisters. Game of Thrones, Season 6. Doran and Trystane are killed by Illyria and the Sand Snakes. Later, Illyria and the Sand Snakes meet with Olenna Tyrell to persuade her to join the forces of House Tyrell with Dorne, to exact vengeance for the deaths of various members of both House Martell and Tyrell. Illyria aligns Dorne and the forces of the now extinct House Martell with Daenerys in support of a Targaryen restoration. Game of Thrones, Season 7. Illyria and the Sand Snakes arrive at Dragonstone and hold council with Daenerys and her court, where a plan is laid out on how best to deal with Cersei and her allies. The Martells are taken by the Ironborn fleet to return to Dorne, where they will gather their armies and prepare to lay siege to King's Landing along with the Tyrell armies. En route, however, Euron Greyjoy attacks them. Tyene and Illyria are both captured, while Obara and Nymeria are killed by Euron. Illyria and Tyene are brought before Cersei Lannister, who has them imprisoned at the dungeons beneath the Red Keep. As a payback for Myrcella's death, Cersei poisons Tyene, leaving Illyria to watch her succumbing to the poison. Game of Thrones, Season 8. An unnamed Martell assumes power after the imprisonment of Illyria Sand and pledged his support to Daenerys. He takes part in the Great Council of 305 AC after Daenerys' death and elects Bran Stark as the new king. Practices. Like their Rhoynar ancestors who migrated to Dorne 1,000 years ago, Dornish noble houses follow gender-blind equal primogeniture, in which the eldest child is the heir regardless of whether that child is male or female. This is different from the male preference inheritance laws in all of the rest of the Seven Kingdoms, the laws of the First Men and Undulls, in which a younger son succeeds ahead of an older daughter. In House Stark, for example, Bran and Rickon are officially ahead of their older sister Sansa in the line of succession, and in House Lannister, Tyrion was officially ahead of Cersei despite being younger than her. In contrast, a ruler of House Martell is always succeeded by their eldest child, even if it is a daughter. The current ruler of Dorne, when House Martell is fully introduced in Season 5, is Prince Doran Martell, who has been the head of House Martell for many years. The immediately preceding head of House Martell, however, was Doran's mother, who was also the mother of Elia and Oberyn. Doran's mother actually had a younger brother, Luwin Martell. Under the inheritance laws of the rest of Westeros, Luwin would have succeeded ahead of Doran's mother, but because Dornish inheritance laws are gender-blind he did not, and therefore he was free to join the elite Kingsguard. In the style of their Rhoynar ancestors who lived in city-states in Essos, near the location of the later free cities, House Martell styles its rulers as Prince of Dorne, or Princess, instead of King, or Queen. All members of House Martell are called a prince/princess, though the current head of the household is the ruling prince/princess. There is little functional difference between the Prince of Dorne and a Lord Paramount of the North, though the title, Prince, is considered to be, at least nominally, more prestigious. Due to uniting with the Iron Throne through marriage alliance on equal terms instead of through conquest, the Martells were allowed to retain several special privileges, among which were continuing to style their ruler as a prince and continuing to practice gender-blind equal primogeniture. While many of the Martells are hot-tempered, especially Prince Oberyn, they are a close-knit and loving family, undivided by internal rivalries such as those in House Lannister and House Baratheon. Members: Prince Doran Martell, Prince of Dorne and Lord of Sunspear. An elderly man suffering from gout, which prevents him from walking and leaves him mostly confined to a wheelchair. Assassinated by Ellaria Sand during her seizure of power. Prince Trystane Martell, his son and heir. Betrothed to Myrcella Baratheon. Killed by Obara Sand. Princess Elia Martell, Doran's sister and middle sibling. Married to Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Raped and murdered by Ser Gregor Clegane in the Sack of King's Landing along with her 2 children, 4-year-old Princess Rhaenys Targaryen and the infant Aegon Targaryen. Prince Oberyn Martell, Doran's brother and youngest sibling. Called the Red Viper, for his penchant for poisoning. Killed by Ser Gregor Clegane while championing Tyrion Lannister during his trial by combat. Oberyn has 8 bastard daughters, collectively known as the Sand Snakes. Ellaria Sand, Oberyn's paramour and mother of several of his bastard daughters. Later seized power by killing Myrcella Baratheon and staging a coup. Imprisoned for life in the dungeons of the Red Keep by Cersei Lannister. Status uncertain. Obara Sand, Oberyn's eldest bastard daughter. Killed by Euron Greyjoy in the assault on the Targaryen fleet. Nymeria Nym Sand, Oberyn's second bastard daughter, born to an Eastern noblewoman. Named after the warrior queen of the Rhoynar. Killed by Euron Greyjoy in the assault on the Targaryen fleet. Tyene Sand, Oberyn's third bastard daughter, the eldest born to Ellaria Sand. Killed by Cersei Lannister, who gave her a poisonous kiss. Sarella Sand, Oberyn's fourth bastard daughter. Elia Sand, Oberyn's fifth bastard daughter. Named in honor of Oberyn's sister. Obella Sand, Oberyn's sixth bastard daughter. Doria Sand, Oberyn's seventh bastard daughter. Larisa Sand, Oberyn's youngest bastard daughter. With unspecified familiar relationship to the main branch there is also Prince Martell, whose first name is unknown, successor to Doran Martell. The immediately previous generation of House Martell. The ruling princess of Dorne, mother of Doran, Elia, and Oberyn. Inherited rule of Dorne in her own right from one of her parents. Succeeded upon her death by her eldest child, Doran. Prince Luwin Martell. Younger brother of the ruling princess, and thus the uncle of Doran, Elia, and Oberyn. A member of Aerys II Targaryen's Kingsguard. Slain at the Battle of the Trident. Household. Areo Hoda, Doran's trusted captain of the guards at Sunspear. Killed by Tyene Sand during the coup in Dorne. Maester Caliot, Sunspear's maester. Killed by Tyene Sand during the coup in Dorne. Princess Myrcella Baratheon, ward of Prince Doran and betrothed of Prince Trystane. Killed by Ellaria Sand with poison. Ser Aerys Oakhart, a knight of the Kingsguard, her sworn shield. Septa Eglantine, of the Faith of the Seven, her governess and tutor. Ancestors. Prince Mors Martell, head of House Martell when Nymeria arrived in Dorne, which he would unite under his house by wedding Nymeria. Princess Nymeria, warrior queen who led Rhoynar refugees to Dorne and wed into House Martell, uniting Dorne under their rule. Princess Maria Martell, the ruling princess of Dorne during the War of Conquest and the only ruler to successfully resist the Targaryens. Prince Corin Martell, the ruling prince of Dorne contemporaneous to King Viserys I Targaryen. Prince Meryn Martell, the ruling prince of Dorne, who ultimately consented to join the rest of the Seven Kingdoms under Targaryen rule through marriage. Princess Daenerys of Sunspear, wife of Meryn and sister of King Daeron II. An unnamed crippled son, for whom Daeron II built a wheelchair. Queen Amariah Martell, sister of Meryn and wife of King Daeron II Targaryen, who along with her brother united Dorne with the rest of the Seven Kingdoms through marriage. Sworn to House Martell. House Illyrian of God's Grace. House Blackmont of Blackmont. House Dalt of Lemonwood. House Dane of Starfall. House Gargalen of Salt Shore. House Jourdain of the Tor. House Manwoody of Kingsgrave. House Corgyle of Sandstone. House Santagar of Spotswood. House Euler of Hellholt. House Ironwood of Ironwood. In the books. In the A Song of Ice and Fire novels, House Martell does not play a major role in events until the third and fourth books in the series, only being referenced in the first two. House Martell was originally a tiny, obscure noble house of Dorne back when the peninsula was home to numerous small, warring states, approximately 1,000 years ago. The Rhoynar, refugees from a war against Valyria on the eastern continent, fled to Westeros led by their warrior queen Nymeria, where they made landfall in Dorne and allied with Lord Mors Martell. After a brief war, Mors named himself the ruler of the unified kingdom of Dorne, adopting the title, Prince, rather than King, in Rhoynish fashion. Mors married Nymeria, uniting the bloodlines of the Rhoynar with the native First Men and Undulls. As a result, the full name of the family is actually House Nymeros Martell, with Nymeros signifying of Nymeria. For example, Oberyn's full name is given as Oberyn Nymeros Martell. However, even the Martells themselves do not usually use the full name, with the inclusion of Nymeros, except on very formal occasions. When Aegon I Targaryen invaded Westeros, he conquered 6 of the 7 kingdoms extant at that time, but the Dornish refused to give open battle where Aegon could destroy them with his dragons, instead resorting to hit-and-run attacks which severely damaged his army through attrition. Aegon agreed to leave Dorne to its own devices after trying to conquer it again during the First Dornish War of 4 AC to 13 AC. However, the Dornish once again prevailed and the Martells managed to kill Aegon's wife, Rhaenys, before forcing the conqueror to agree to peace on their terms. Aegon never tried conquering Dorne again. A century and a half later, Dorne was briefly occupied by the armies of King Daeron I, but overthrew them in a bloody rebellion. Eventually, roughly a century before the events of the series, Dorne joined the Seven Kingdoms through a peaceful marriage alliance. House Martell's motto, unbowed, unbent, unbroken, directly references the fact that they were never conquered by outsiders. Because they came under the authority of the Iron Throne through marriage instead of the sword, House Martell and the other Dornish houses continue to practice absolute primogeniture, in which the eldest child is the designated heir, regardless of whether they are male or female. Another major difference is that the rulers of Dorne are styled ruling princes, or ruling princesses, instead of lords paramount. At the time of the beginning of the narrative, the current head of House Martell is the aging Prince Doran. His daughter and eldest child is Arianne Martell. Despite being female, she has been actively groomed to succeed her father, as are eldest daughters all over Dorne. In his old age and infirmity, though he retains his wits, Doran has semi-retired, delegating most of the day-to-day governance of Dorne to Arianne. The Martells were loyal vassals of the Iron Throne, with Princess Elia Martell marrying Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and bearing him 2 children. During Robert's rebellion, the Martells were unhappy with Rhaegar's betrayal of Elia by taking Lyanna Stark as his paramour and sparking a war over the matter. Still, they supported King Aerys II Targaryen's bid to retain the throne, predominantly due to Aerys effectively holding Elia as a hostage to ensure their loyalty. The Martells lost many soldiers at the Battle of the Trident, and Princess Elia and her children were brutally killed during the sack of King's Landing by Lannister soldiers. Ironically, the Martells had only grudgingly stayed loyal to the Targaryens during the Civil War, but the needless and brutal murder of Elia turned Dorne into a hotbed of pro-Targaryen sentiment, to the point that, after the sack of King's Landing, Oberyn had wanted to continue the fighting on behalf of Viserys Targaryen. Though House Martell swore fealty to King Robert Baratheon after the war, though this was only due to extensive peace negotiations on the part of Jon Arryn, they have harbored anger and resentment towards the Lannisters ever since and have adopted a mostly isolationist policy ever since, not mixing with the other great houses unless totally necessary. As a result, the Dornish have stronger relations with the free cities of Essos than the rest of Westeros. The Martells and Tyrells have been sworn enemies for many generations. Over the centuries, they have fought border wars beyond count, and raided back and forth across mountains and marches even when at peace. The enmity between the two houses waned a bit after Dorne became part of the Seven Kingdoms, but the maiming of Willis Tyrell by the Dornish Prince Oberyn Martell in a joust fanned the animosity between the families, though Willis himself does not hold any grudge against Oberyn, as both men knew what happened was simply an unfortunate accident. In the second novel, Varys reports Tyrion that Prince Doran Martell has called his banners, and there are rumors that he intends to join Renly Baratheon. Renly tells Catelyn Stark the same thing. Knowing that an alliance between Renly and Dorne will be disastrous to the Lannisters, Tyrion takes steps to prevent it by offering Prince Doran to marry Myrcella to Trystane, his sister's killer, a seat at the small council, and some castles on the marches. Despite Cersei's protests, Tyrion sends Myrcella to Dorne as a token of good faith. The Martells stay neutral throughout the war, although it is unclear whether the reason is Tyrion's offer, or the Martells bide their time. Tywin, too, understands it is necessary to appease the Martells, lest they form an alliance with Stannis Baratheon. He is partly correct. As revealed in the fourth and fifth novels, Doran Martell intends to support enemies of House Lannister. The enemies in question, however, are the Targaryens, not the Baratheons. Cersei deeply hates the Dornish in general and the Martells in particular, thinking that all Dornishmen are snakes, and the Martells are the worst of them. Her hatred is fueled by the fact that Oberyn fought for Tyrion at the trial by combat, and had come within a hairbreadth of a victory that would have allowed Tyrion to escape the blame for Joffrey's murder. This is perhaps the reason for her unsuccessful scheme to assassinate Trystane. In A Feast for Crows, Doran reveals to Arianne that he sent her brother Quentyn to Meereen, to offer a marriage alliance to Daenerys. Quentyn meets Daenerys in the following novel, but she rejects his offer, because she has already promised to wed his daughter Zoe Lorak. Some time later, after Daenerys departs from Meereen, Quentyn attempts to steal her dragons, but is killed. His family has not been informed yet of his death. In A Dance with Dragons, the presumed dead Aegon Targaryen, the son of Rhaegar and Elia, and Jon Cunnington arrive at Westeros. Cunnington believes it is essential to obtain the support of the Martells, because only they have enough power to defy House Lannister and its allies. For that purpose, he sends Doran a letter, informing him that his nephew is alive, and offering an alliance. Doran, cautious as ever, regards the contents of the letter dubiously, since he prefers not to act till he knows for a certainty what is happening. He sends his daughter Arianne to find out whether Aegon and Cunnington are really the people whom they claim to be. While the Martells intend to ally with House Targaryen in general, it has yet to be seen which of the individual Targaryen contenders they will support, Daenerys or Aegon. George R.R. Martin has said that the production team isn't certain how many members of House Martell they can fit into the TV series. Doran has 3 children, while Oberyn and Illyria have 8 daughters. Even for House Tyrell, which has 4 children in the current generation, 2 have apparently been cut from the TV series, Loras and Marjorie's older brothers from the books. Conversely, in Season 2 the production team thought they might have to cut Stannis Baratheon's only child, Shireen, but subsequently was able to introduce her in Season 3. While Oberyn and Illyria do appear in Season 4, it remains to be seen how many other Martells can be introduced into the TV continuity in later seasons. House Martell's name might have been inspired by Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, who led the Franks to turn back the Muslim invasion of France at the Battle of Tours in 732. Known members: Prince Doran Martell, the current Lord of Sunspear and Prince of Dorne. Lady Malario of Norvos, his wife. They married for love, but the two later became estranged, and she has returned to Norvos. Princess Arianne Martell, his oldest daughter and heir, since Dornish law upholds equal primogeniture, regardless of gender. Prince Quentyn Martell, his oldest son, fostering with Lord Ironwood. Burnt to death by Rhaegal. Prince Trystane Martell, his youngest son. Betrothed to Myrcella Baratheon. Prince Oberyn Martell, Doran's younger brother, called the Red Viper. Killed by Gregor Clegane. The Sand Snakes, Prince Oberyn's bastard daughters. Obara Sand, born of a whore of Old Town. Nymeria Sand, called Lady Nym, born of a noblewoman of Volantis. Tyene Sand, born of a Septa. Sarella Sand, born of a trader of the Summer Islands. Elia Sand, born of Oberyn's paramour, Illyria Sand. Obella Sand, born of Oberyn's paramour, Illyria Sand. Doria Sand, born of Oberyn's paramour, Illyria Sand. Larisa Sand, born of Oberyn's paramour, Illyria Sand. Princess Elia Martell, Doran and Oberyn's sister, married to Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Slain in the sack of King's Landing along with her 2 children. Prince, Lewin Martell, a knight of the King's Guard during the rule of Aerys II Targaryen. Slain at the Battle of the Trident. With unspecified familiar relationship to the main branch there is also Ser Manfrey Martell, Castellan of Sunspear. A cousin of Doran Martell, it is not stated of which degree. The following sworn houses have yet to appear in the series. House Will of Will. House Toland of Ghost Hill. House Fowler of Skirreach. House Vaith of the Dunes. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.